Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Salt Spring Island on Fire, a webinar and community roundtable table. We're just going to wait 1 or 2 minutes for all of our attendees to filter in. Okay, that should be enough time. Welcome to Salt Spring Island on Fire, webinar and community roundtable. My name is Jonathan Reimer. I oversee the fire and emergency programs here at the Capital Regional District, and we're really excited to have you for our session today. So I want to welcome you to a conversation about wildfire on Salt Spring Island. We have assembled a panel of experts for you to discuss wildfire with, and we have about 1.5 hours, or at least up to that, depending on how many questions we receive today. This webinar is being recorded, so do note that in the questions you ask, and we will be sharing that recording with you afterwards. Now, at any time today, during your presentations, you can find that little Q&A button, should be on the bottom of your screen there. Open that up and type a question or a comment for the presenter. Between each session, we will be reading those questions out to the presenters and making sure that they're answered for you. So don't be shy. This is only a conversation if it's a two-way conversation, and we really want this to be interactive for you. So on the agenda today, we have, first off, wildfire resiliency on Salt Spring Island, and Connor Corbett will be speaking to that. Rob Severson will be speaking to protecting homes from wildfire. Jane O'Higgins-Wilson will be speaking on evacuations. And John Wakefield will present on emergency preparedness. And our great moderator is Jolette Holland. She'll be reading our questions today. So just before we start, I'm gonna launch one poll here for you to get us all warmed up. You should see it there in front of you. In your judgment, what is your risk of wildfire? So your personal risk of wildfire where you live, is it none, low, moderate, high, extreme, or perhaps you don't know? I'll give it a minute for everyone to answer. So we have most people answering. I'll share the results with you here. So you can see that most of us answered moderate. We have a few folks who said low, a few more that said high, and a few that said extreme. And we have one person that said, I don't know. So that's a good way to start our discussions today. And with that, I'll invite Connor, if you can join us here.
Hey, Jonathan, I'll just get my screen sharing going once you stop sharing yours. And can you see that?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. Well, thanks everyone for joining us at this webinar. I'm going to set the stage here by discussing the recent work myself and Jonathan have completed on the Community Wildfire Resiliency Plan for Salt Spring Island electoral area. My name is Connor Corbett. I'm a registered professional forester with a company called Diamond Head Consulting. I led this project hand in hand with Jonathan Reimer from the Capital Regional District. Because our time is brief and this is a fairly large project, I'm going to just zero in on certain components of this project. But if there's anything I miss or anything you're interested in or want to hear more about, I completely welcome some questions at the end of the presentation or offline via Jonathan if there's anything that you think about later after the presentation or what have you. So what is a community wildfire resiliency plan? These are government grant funded plans for local government, in this case, the Capital Regional District, and it's to create a foundational, very high level plan for mitigating wildfire risk. It acts as a roadmap for building community resiliency to wildfire. And to do so, the first step, which is a big step, is to provide an assessment of wildfire risk for the community at the community level. So for this case, at the Salt Spring Island level. And that's going to be the main focus of what I talk today, which will really set the stage for the other presentations that follow me. And just an important note is that these plans are funded throughout British Columbia by a government program. So there are certain requirements and things that we need to meet as part of this plan. So the first step is to figure out what the area we're going to focus on for a community wildfire resiliency plan is. So one thing that's unique about Salt Spring Island is for most communities, we focus on an area of the community called the wildland-urban interface. And so that's the areas of the community where our developed communities meet natural forested land. So usually the case is you have a downtown developed town site or urban core, then some suburban areas, then maybe some agriculture, and then forest. And then eventually you're so far into the forest that there isn't really many values that are at risk of wildfire. It's just the forest itself. So Salt Spring's unique in that the wildland-urban interface is pretty much the entire electoral area. There's only a handful of areas that aren't in the wildland-urban interface. And so the wildland-urban interface is really important for three reasons in terms of wildfire risk. First, it's where most of the developed community exists. So where most of the things that we need to protect are located. Secondly, it's where forest meets our developed communities. So where the risk is the highest typically is where that natural area meets our developed area. And thirdly, it's where most human-caused ignitions occur. And that's because that's where most of the human activity is occurring. And that's really important in an area like Salt Spring or in the South Coast or the Lower Mainland, where a majority of wildfires are human-caused. So before we start talking about what wildfire risk means for Salt Spring, I want to just discuss what we mean by wildfire risk in this context. So risk in general is of any event is going to be a function of probability and consequence. So any hazardous event that we're assessing for risk, tsunamis, earthquakes, or wildfire, we want to think about probability and consequence. So for wildfire, probability, we use a technical term called wildfire threat. And that's basically how flammable is the vegetation? How flammable is the forest? What are the factors that cause this forest to be really flammable or not very flammable? So it's what type of vegetation it is, what type of topography there is, and what type of weather the area experiences regularly. And this is a quite technical definition, but the simple explanation is how flammable is this area of vegetation, this forest, this stand, this field, whatever the group is, how flammable it is. And what we do with wildfire risk is we take that assessment of the flammability, so the probability of severe wildfire, and we understand where it is on the landscape of the community. So where are the flammable forests in relation to the things we want to protect? And so that gives us these broad classifications of wildfire risk. So it's how likely is there to be severe wildfire under normal weather conditions in relation to our community values. So a good example is an extreme wildfire risk forest would be something like the forests of the Okanagan right beside the city of Kelowna. So really flammable forests close to a very developed community. In contrast, a low wildfire risk community would be something that's very low flammability and also very remote. So think a really wet coastal forest way up on the North Coast, really far from a community. That's just going to be low wildfire risk. And so now we can jump in to our findings of our wildfire risk assessment for Salt Spring Island. And so there's 2 points that this map really highlights. So as you can see, most of the area that we assess has been assessed as a moderate wildfire risk. And so that's all the yellow on the map. And so you can see we've zoomed in on some of the more developed areas on the right to give a little bit of a zoomed in picture. There's some areas that are high, but it's generally moderate. And the second is that you're going to notice a majority of the area we've assessed is grayed out. So our assessment is limited to public land, and that's one of the terms of the grant funding. And so that's why all these areas are grayed out, because those are private land. We just have no information to base a wildfire risk assessment on. And I really want to just jump into those two key findings. The first is that moderate wildfire risk is typical throughout Salt Spring Island. And so what does that mean? That means that the weather conditions and the forest conditions are such that wildfire is possible. Every year there's a possibility of wildfire during normal weather conditions. And what that means is the types of wildfires we're going to see, though, with moderate wildfire risk is it's very unlikely that we're going to see really severe landscape level catastrophic wildfires, the types of fires that are beyond the fire department, beyond the BC Wildfire Service. Fires like Lytton or Fort McMurray, those really severe landscape fires are very unlikely in Salt Spring. What's much more likely is a smaller fire occurring very close to homes and communities. But that risk should not be discounted, because remember, our moderate wildfire risk is at a landscape scale. And when we have a community like Salt Spring, where the community itself is all wildland urban interface, pretty much every home is in the forest or very near the forest. So small fires can have really severe consequences, even if the BC Wildfire Service can come and control them relatively quickly. When the values are that close to the forest, even something like a moderate risk fire can have severe consequences. And the second takeaway is that the land is fragmented by, the wildfire risk assessment is fragmented by private land. So we don't have a complete picture of the risk environment. And that being said, one of the key things I think is that when we see a map like this, where the wildfire risk rating is very consistent, it's pretty good evidence that the gaps in our assessment are consistent with the findings of the areas that we have assessed. And that's even more so in a place like Salt Spring, where the forested crown land doesn't look that different from the private land for the most part. The private land is often just as forested as the crown land and the public land we have assessed. So I know that was probably a ton of information in a really short period. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'll just give a break now for questions.
Connor, there are no questions at this time about your presentation.
Okay, great.
If any come up later, we can maybe ask them at the end of the entire presentation today.
Yep, sounds great. Thank you.
Do you know what? A question just popped up. Okay, so the question is, did you take into account the damage to lakes and water sources, which a wildfire might immediately take down if chemical fire products get dumped in the water? That may result in immediate impacts. And she also added, people will have to leave the island right away.
Yeah, so that's a two-part question. We do provide an assessment in the Community Wildfire Resiliency Plan of the various drinking water sources throughout the island. It's quite difficult because throughout the Southern Gulf Islands, drinking water systems are really, really complicated. That being said, a majority of the drinking water on Salt Spring Island is coming from the Water District, and they've been really helpful in working on this project and collaborating with us, and they're doing some excellent work to protect the drinking water sources. I would say it's absolutely a concern of catastrophic wildfire in watersheds, and sedimentation is something we're very concerned about and something we do discuss in the Community Wildfire Resiliency Plan. Integrating that into our qualitative wildfire assessment. So what you saw, it's very hard to kind of put a number on that wildfire risk, or say it's moderate, say it's high, but qualitatively, we can say that it is a high wildfire risk. And the second part of your question regarding the use of chemical retardants for wildfire and that getting into the drinking water system, I don't really have a great answer for you. A lot of the literature I've said a lot of the literature I've read is that this silicone-based retardant that they use is soluble and it's not harmful in watersheds, but I can't speak really strongly to that. Maybe Jonathan, you might have something to add there, but I'm not super knowledgeable about that.
No, thank you. This is actually a really good question, and it's also not one that I'm going to take, but I'm going to pass the buck to someone I think who can speak to this better than I can. We do have Mitchell Sharon from the Salt Spring Island Fire Rescue online. Is that something that you're able to speak to in terms of your approach as the fire rescue agency on Salt Spring Island?
Yeah. So if we're talking about the types of, there's a couple of different products that could be used as far as chemicals. So let's just divide them up a little bit. One is we can use foams to assist us in fire suppression. And we would use those very cautiously around water supplies. We use them in very small quantities and they're deemed safe. They're very comparable to dish soap, and we use them in really small concentrations, like 0.1%. However, even small amounts of soap into a water supply or into an ecologically sensitive area can have an impact. So we're aware of that and mindful of using those products in that area. The other type of chemicals to maybe discuss would be fire retardants used by aerial water bombers, and those are of a different nature that I'm not as well acquainted with, but recognizing the risks that those would pose to water supplies, I'm sure BC Wildfire would also be really cautious about using those kinds of products. Going back a step, remember the overarching idea here is that we're not going to have a likely large-scale fire event. We do commonly have small-scale fire events, some of which do occur near water supply areas, and we're able to successfully put them out every year. We rarely have anything larger than a hectare, which is about the size of a soccer field. There has been very few fires of that scale in the last 20 years. And even a fire of a hectare or two is kind of a big deal, but the kind of thing we could even manage without water bombers, without foam.
Good answer. Thank you, Mitchell.
There's one more question here. She wonders if did your study look at who has the mandate to help out with fires? There are parts of this island that would need the province to step in and help.
Yes. So yeah, part of our study is we do look at the fire protection areas where they are. So in this case, Salt Spring Island Fire Rescue, which doesn't cover the whole island. But I think the important takeaway is that if there is a forest fire, the BC Wildfire Service is coming. And I spent many years on a fire crew, and we were always told, and I was a leader and I assessed fires, and we were always told, fight the fire. If there's going to be any bureaucratic paperwork, we'll figure it out later. So if you're worried about fire on your home and you're worried about someone calling, and if it's a vegetation fire, like a wildfire, the BC Wildfire Service is going to come.
Great, thank you, Mitchell. And that's it for the questions at this time.
Good. Well, thank you very much, Connor. Once again, if you do think of any questions for Connor, we're going to do one last round of questions with all of the panelists at the end of this. But let's move on to our next topic, and that's protecting homes from wildfire. And with us to discuss that is Rob Severson.
Yeah, I might go to Mitchell a little bit as well with this, if there's any questions at the end. So if everybody's ready for that, that's good. I am going to attempt to share a screen. So I'll just ask everybody to give me a second here, please, and thank you. Let's just see what we can do. And oh, everybody can still see my notes, I think, can't you?
Yep.
Okay.
You can launch your PowerPoint there.
Let's see, from beginning. There we go. Oh, so we're going to try this out a little bit better today. What I'm just going to talk about again is, in case of a wildfire, what can you do as a homeowner to be better prepared? And that's where the Fire Smart program really comes into play. And so we're going to discuss that a little bit. This is a photo. It is, it's from the FireSmart website. And this was Loon Lake in 2017. And I was on this fire close to this area, actually. I was on a different end of it in Clinton. But you can see in this photo, some homes did make it, some didn't. A little bit of that was FireSmart preparedness, as well as where the structure protection was able to set up. So we'll move to the next one. So the role of FireSmart, what is it? This is a good photo. I would not want to be in any of these homes, but I think in Salt Spring or anywhere in the Southern Gulf Islands, you can take a look around and see that a lot of homes are built right into the WUI, just like this. That's the wildland urban interface. And so this is not an uncommon site as far as homes are right up against the tree line. And so the idea of FireSmart is to give you people as the homeowners the ability to protect your homes or better protect your homes. And what we'll do with that is the best thing you could do, I would suggest, if you haven't done it already, is contact Salt Spring Fire. They have local FireSmart representatives who can come to your home, sorry, and do a home assessment. It's totally free. And what it can do is give you a different perspective on where to spend some of your time. If you're out in your yard doing work, or, you know, it's springtime now, the weather's nice and you want to start preparing, they will help you and direct you to some different ideas that maybe you didn't have, that you could, if an ember lands, the idea is that it's not going to start your house on fire. There's also some opportunity for rebates. I think Salt Spring is doing a $250 rebate program. So I would look into that as well. But that's what FireSmart is. It's about giving you as homeowners ideas and direction on how to make your home safer. And why should you care? Because if you haven't prepared your home for a wildfire and you are evacuated, a lot of people just like to say, oh, the fire department's just going to come and they're going to help me, which is great. And the fire department will be there, but resources are limited, of course, just like anything. And so it's really important that if you've done the mitigation work prior, your home, based on research, has a 90% chance of surviving a wildfire. If you haven't done any of the work, it's down to about a 4% chance. So prevention is the key here. And here's the survival statistics piece. So you can look at it if you have a flammable roof, as in a shake roof, and you haven't done any work at all. If there is a wildfire, your home is about a 4% chance. If you've done a lot of the work and you've got a metal roof or maybe asphalt shingles, you're at about a 90% survival rate. And not only that, but it makes it safer for firefighters to get in front of your home if you've taken the time to defend it. So that means we can set up, we'll put firefighters in front of it and risk our firefighters a little bit more than if you haven't done anything. Because if you haven't done any work, it's not safe for us to stand in front of. So we're going to go to a little video here that talks about the different zones. And I think there is some value in this. So let's hope this works.
As we continue to extend our lifestyles and communities into the forested and grassland areas of the country, we become more exposed to the danger of wildfire. Living where wildfires can occur puts our homes at risk, but it is possible to live safely and resiliently with wildfire. FireSmart principles are designed to mitigate a home's vulnerability by taking proactive action on our properties to reduce wildfire risks. Homes ignite due to the condition of the home and everything that surrounds it out to 100 meters from the foundation. This is called the home ignition zone. Let's check in with the residents of Aspen Street in the community of Little Blue to see the proactive steps they're taking within their FireSmart home ignition zone.
Hi, I'm Levi. I've lived in this house for over 25 years. Wildfire seasons are starting earlier, lasting longer, and are more intense. We need to take action. Residents in the community next to us were evacuated last week and suffered devastating loss. We need to take ownership of our part in the overlapping home ignition zones in our neighborhood. Starting with the most critical zone, the non-combustible zone. which should be a minimum 1.5 meter non-combustible surface around your entire home. I've cleared the vegetation and combustible material around my house down to bare mineral soil, including combustible debris from under my deck.
Hi, I'm Sandy. Priority Zone 1 is between 1.5 and 10 meters from your home. To create a landscape that will not easily allow fire to reach our homes, my husband and I moved our renovation materials out to Priority Zone 2, breaking them into small organized piles. Firewood piles have been moved to Priority Zone 2 and patio furniture into the shed. We also plan to incorporate some fire-resistant landscaping products into our yard.
Howdy, my name is Colin. I've been working in Priority Zone 2, 10 to 30 meters from your home. The trees of the vast forested landscape that our homes back onto need to be pruned to 2 meters to prevent fire from climbing the trees. Keeping fire on the ground will make it much easier for firefighters to manage.
Hi, I'm Alex. I've been busy in Priority Zone 3, which is 30 to 100 meters from my home. To create a fire break, we've hired a professional arborist to come in and thin out the thick spruce trees we have in Zone 3. I'm also going to prune the remaining spruce trees up to 2 meters and clear the dead and down woody debris. In subdivisions like Aspen Street, priority zones can overlap. It is important to talk to your neighbors and identify ways that you can work together.
We've all taken one small action on our properties, but we need to do more, and we need to do it together. I say we contact our local fire department and see what else we can do.
Agreed.
All right, perfect. So that talked about the zones. Just so you're aware, the zones are changing a little bit, but they're the same thing. They're just coming up with different names. So we'll worry about that at a different time. One more, this is a quick one, and this is about a home that was all fire smarted. The builder did a fantastic job, and they had a fire roll through their area, and the home sustained a little bit of damage, but was still there. So we'll just watch this quick one.
My name's Craig Stratton, and I'm a builder in the Squamish area. We're at Glacier Valley Farms up the Squamish Valley. The whole property is 42 acres. Well, this would be our home that we've just finished doing a bit of a renovation on that was impacted by the fire. So I was actually trying to get back to the house with some pumps to hopefully drop in our pond and do some more fire protection around it. And they stopped me at the bridge, and I was told by the gentleman there, I had described to him where I lived, and it was 300 meters up the road on the left, and he just looked at me and said, "Your house is gone." I found his description of saying the house is gone to be a little bit surprising, because I had chosen the materials that we'd chosen, and I didn't think there was anything that was close enough to actually catch the house on fire, but I was doubting at that point in time. Well, the fire itself began early in the afternoon, and we had a neighbor call and tell us that there was a fire up the valley, but not to be too concerned, but just something to be aware of. And over the course of a couple of hours, it went from being a very relaxed situation to extremely chaotic. The fire was right next to our property, and everybody was running around trying to save our animals and set them free, and put 2 goats in a car. Got chaotic very quickly. Property line burned right up to there, but since we'd been cleaning the edges of our property and it was fairly green at that point in time, didn't really come onto the property. But then an ember from the fire flew up and landed on our carport over here and lit the carport roof on fire. And the heat was intense off of the structure that was burning. The helicopters were coming right as that building became engulfed, so they were able to kind of keep the area cool a bit. But basically our vinyl windows melted and our exterior pane of glass blew out. Didn't do a ton of damage to the building because of the products we used. We're extremely happy we took this fire smart approach to construction and the renovation of our house, because it's obviously proved to be extremely important and saved the building. We recognize that if we hadn't done that, the house wouldn't be here any longer. So we used the hardy board siding and a metal roof, and the combination, I've always been told, and since I began in the industry, is a great combination for interface fires, and now I have the proof. I'm confident that our home would not be here today if we hadn't built in a fire smart method. Good advanced planning is absolutely crucial, because if the fire starts to come, you have no opportunity to do that work afterwards. So if you want to learn more, go to firesmartbc.ca. Start now, take action, it'll be worth it.
Everybody likes a success story. So again, it just shows I've been on 4 deployments for wildfire, and as a structural firefighter, been on 4, and I've seen where it actually has worked just like that. So it's a program, I definitely believe in it. And there's just a little bit of information now on your screen. I would say Salt Spring has done a fantastic job with their Fire Smart program. So any questions, please talk to their fire department, saltspringfire.com. That's where you'll find a lot of information. And I imagine most of their firefighters can give you the information, but go to saltspringfire.com, and there's a spot on there you can log in. You can sign up for an assessment. There's a calendar. So Mitch can speak more to it a little bit, but that's what I would do. Definitely start with an assessment and get yourselves ready. That's it.
Thank you very much, Rob. And Gillette, are there any questions for Rob on FireSmart? We can't hear you, Gillette.
Okay, there we go. The question is, has FireSmart studies considered the longer-term increased risk as climate change raises temperatures and the potential for multi-term, longer-term El Nino and El Niña events?
That I do not know the answer to. I'm not sure how far they're looking ahead, to tell you the truth. So I think the program itself is based around higher temperatures and a longer fire season, which BC is seeing. So, but as far as, weather patterns and everything else, I'm not sure.
Well, Rob, maybe I can pass this question off then. Connor, if you're still with us, I do recall there is quite a section on climate change in the Community Wildfire Resiliency Plan for Salt Spring. Is this something you can speak to, just some of those longer term trends and the likely impact on Salt Spring?
Yeah, I think I can give a short answer and a long answer. So the short answer is it's definitely something we talk about, and we have a section on it in our CWRP. So our wildfire risk assessment is what the risk is now. And then we have a section on climate change where we kind of hypothesize on what the risk is going to be. And the simple answer is the wildfire risk is going to increase in Salt Spring. And the longer answer, and I'll try not to get too into the science and the background and get too technical, but one of the interesting things about Salt Spring Island and this part of the world is that severe wildfire does happen, but it happens very, very infrequently. We're talking once every couple hundred years. Naturally, there's been really, really large wildfires, like tens of thousands of hectares, under really, really rare weather conditions. Like a lot of different things have to line up. And some of the literature is starting to say that those weather conditions are going to become more frequent with climate change. So an example would be the heat dome we saw last year, 2 years ago, really, really crazy events. As those become more frequent, those landscape level fires become significantly more likely. And so that's the kind of short answer and the somewhat longer answer.
And maybe I'll do a follow-up just based on that information. What kind of time line are you talking about there? So you're talking about these kind of once every many hundreds of years events. Is this something we're going to be worrying about in the next 5 or 10 years, or is this a longer term?
There's no specific number I would put as this is the number we need to worry about, this number of years. But as by way of example, the west coast of Oregon has a very, very similar ecosystems to what we have in the coastal Douglas fir, so in the south coast of BC. And in 2020, I believe, or 21, they had unprecedented massive wildfires because they had weather conditions that they had never seen before in anyone's lifetime. And so that's kind of a big indicator in my mind that this is something that for sure I think we will see these weather conditions in our lifetime. Absolutely. And I think in the near future, in the next decade or two, we'll start seeing these weather conditions happening, not just once every couple hundred years like they used to happen, but we'll probably see them happen a couple times over the next couple decades. The good news is that they still will be quite rare, and we're talking a handful of days a year. So by way of example, I was in a webinar with the BC Wildfire Service, and 2022 was an extremely hot and dry year for some periods. And they only really hit weather conditions where they were really, really concerned about catastrophic wildfire about 4 or 5 days. And you not only need the weather conditions, you also need the ignition as well. So you need a bunch of factors to line up.
Oh, good answer. Thank you for that, Connor. So it sounds to me, in the shortest terms, the next couple of years, we're still talking about that moderate wildfire risk, but the trend lines are concerning.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Any other questions, Jolette?
That's all the questions right now, Jonathan.
Thank you very much. Let's move to our next topic, and let's talk about evacuations. And to speak to that, we have Jane O'Higgins-Wilson. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. I'll just get my slides up. There we go. Okay, so I'm Jane O'Higgins-Wilson. I'm the Electoral Area Emergency Services Coordinator, and I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about the basics of evacuation. So in this section, I'm going to cover an overview of evacuation behavior. I'm going to review the language and the process of evacuation and talk about preparing for evacuation. I'd like to give you some context as I talk about how people behave during evacuations. I've been evacuated twice. I was on Haida Gwaii during the 2012 and 2013 evacuations and tsunami, the earthquakes and tsunami evacuations, and neither time did I really act the way that I would have thought I was going to act. Before those events, I would have assumed that warning the public would simply be a matter of informing them that they were in danger, and then they'd take the appropriate action. So you sound the alarm, people get the message, they evacuate. In fact, people do a variety of different things. They argue with their spouse, they go online and do research, they go back to sleep. My favorite, call my mother. Do not do that. That woman is not that useful in a crisis. This causes delays in acting because it also means some people end up not evacuating at all. They end up just searching for information. So it turns out this isn't unusual. People are complicated, and we're even more complicated when we're going through something that's stressful and scary. So the way we make decisions is complicated, and the things that we'll do is complicated. Fortunately, some very smart people have studied why this happens. So this is Lindell and Perry's model outlining the decision-making process. And the shorthand is this: for a person to evacuate, they both need to understand that they need to evacuate. They need to feel fear. They need to feel that they need to evacuate, and they need to understand what it is that they can do to make it better. There's also social factors that go into this, but that would be a huge topic for me to try and cover right now. So the research has shown that there's things that we can do to communicate evacuation information in a way that is more helpful. First, we can make sure that the message is coming from a trusted source and demonstrate that that messenger can be trusted. We can provide clear messages and ensure that messaging is consistent across different media. And we can also have two-way communication pre-event. So talk about what the danger is and talk about evacuation before something happens, like what we're trying to do right now. So I'm going to talk about evacuation language because being clear and precise about the language that we use can make those decisions easier. So an evacuation alert means that something might happen. You should get ready because an evacuation order is possible. An evacuation order means that you are at risk and you need to leave the area immediately. A rescind means it's safe and you can go home. And shelter in place means stay where you are and follow instructions from authorities. A couple terms you might hear are reception centers and assembly areas. A reception center is a hub where volunteers provide assistance to evacuees. And an assembly area is a designated safe location to wait for more information. The final two terms you might hear are a SOL, so that's a state of local emergency. It's a legal term. It's a process by which the local authority, so that would be the CRD in this case, is allowed to use emergency powers such as requiring an evacuation. A tactical evacuation is done immediately by the responders because something has to be done, because they need to take action right now. So the process on paper looks like this. The hazard occurs, the evacuation alert is issued, so the public knows they should prepare. The hazard escalates, a SOL is issued, followed quickly by an evacuation order. The area is evacuated, the hazard situation improves, the order is rescinded, and everyone goes home. This is also possible. The event happens and there's a tactical evacuation because it has to be the area has to be evacuated right then. And then the paperwork is done afterwards. So where are you going to receive this evacuation information? Ideally, you're going to be bombarded with it. It's going to go out on the CRD notification system. It'll be on social media. It'll be on news sources, and likely the provincial intrusive system is going to be used as well. There'll also be responders going door to door and traffic signs and flaggers. I do ask that you sign up for the CRD notifications, the PAN system. If you haven't already done so, we're going to put it in the chat so you can do so. And we will have more warning information than just the evacuation information. So it's a really great thing to have. So what are we doing and what can you do to prepare? So the CRD has created evacuation guides specific to the electoral areas. The guide is short and sweet. It has a map of each area with possible reception centers and assembly areas. It has contact information for that area's emergency program, where to sign up for the PAN system. It covers knowing the risks in your area, the basics of understanding emergency messaging. And it has a household emergency plan as a fillable PDF and an evacuation checklist on the back page so that the things that you need to think of just as you're leaving your house. So this is the Salt Spring Island Guide. It's available in hard copy from your local emergency program, or a digital version is available at the link that we're going to put in the chat now. So a final comment on preparedness. The province has supplied an online evacuation assistance tool, and CRD volunteers are trained on it. So if you can't make it to a reception center and need help, we will still be able to help you. If you want to be proactive and get ahead of the game, make sure you have the BC Services Card app on your device, because this makes signing up for the ERA tool much easier. And you can actually even pre-register for ERA if you need to. So that app is free on the Apple App Store and on Google Play. So thank you for taking the time to listen to me. Hopefully you never do have to evacuate, but if you do, you'll have the right information to make the decisions you need to make to protect yourself and your family. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jane. Really good information. I'm really impressed with that guide. Hopefully everybody goes checks it out. Do we have any questions for Jane on evacuations?
There are no questions. Oh, one just popped up. And the question is, has the elderly demographic of Salt Spring been given consideration with respect to evacuation? How relevant do you think the elderly population is?
Oh, I think that's very relevant. And I do think, when you do disaster research, the vulnerable populations are really the people that you need to be most concerned about. So you're about to hear from your local emergency program coordinator, and he'll be talking about that specifically, how they considering vulnerable populations, and the neighborhood programs and how neighborhood programs can help with assisting the vulnerable.
Thanks, Jane.
Good answer. Any other questions?
That was the only question for now. Oh, one just popped up. Any updates on the new zone definitions? I'm asking because there are different approaches taken to forest health to retain moisture and lower fire risks that are different from fire smart approaches.
Interesting. I think this question is back to Jonathan and Rob.
Should we save it till the end, Jonathan?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
So Darlene, we'll just take 5 on that question and put it to everybody right at the end.
Okay, and that's it for now then.
All right. Well, we'll move on to our final presenter of the day, and certainly not the least. John Wakefield is the Emergency Program Coordinator for Salt Spring Island, and will be speaking to us on emergency preparedness.
Thank you, Jonathan, and good afternoon, everybody. You should be seeing my screen now. Anybody
Got ya.
confirm? Yep, great, perfect, thank you. And so, yes, I'm here to talk about personal emergency preparedness, and it's a good time to be doing this because it's a blue sky out there. It's a beautiful day, and we don't have an emergency. This is when you want to be planning and thinking about these things, so that we're prepared if they happen. So the alternate is when we look at the what can happen out there. This is the photos compliments of the Salt Spring Island Fire Rescue, and this was on a hot, windy, dry summer night in July 2007. We had a massive and aggressive fire. This quickly engulfed the large timber frame conference center at Bullock Lake Resort, and it sent embers and set spot fires kilometers away. And this is personally why I've become more involved in emergency management, as I live a kilometer away from where this center was. And as the crow flies, and I saw the entire sky glowing orange with embers flying. It was pretty scary, and I'm just very thankful to the responding agency. Salt Spring Island Fire Rescue did a great job in containing the fire, as well as the community getting out there and putting out spot fires. Thankfully, it did not, it was contained because of those actions. But it really did wake me up to the fact that I needed to be better prepared and motivated me to get more involved with the emergency program. At the time, I was wondering, well, do we need to go? What do we do? So it definitely was a wake up. And we're getting more wake up calls with climate change, as we've been talking about. We're consistently reminded of other hazards that require our personal preparation. So for my quick presentation today, I'm going to review who should be prepared, understanding the risks, making plans, building your kits, and getting to know your neighbors. So really, preparedness is a responsibility that all of us share. Individual, family, neighborhood preparedness is the foundation of a resilient community. Without that foundation, we would be toppling a little bit. We need to prepare to protect our lives, health, infrastructure, property, environment, and our finances. And so being prepared and knowing what to do in a disaster can mitigate the impact and lessen the burden on first responder and key agencies. And so again, this is a quick skim across the surface on preparedness. A deeper dive can be taken on your own time through some of the reference sources that we've been talking about today. So number one is knowing the risks. We're talking about wildfires today. Some of the other top 10 hazards are listed here. And there's many risks we can face. In fact, there's over 50 types of hazards that can impact us. And understanding these types of risks, how they interrelate, will help you and your household become more resilient. And a lot of these hazards are dependent from area to area. So in one area they could have more of a risk, in other areas less. So having local knowledge on those risks is very helpful as well. Number two is to make a plan. And there's a lot of good reasons to plan. You'll be more effective in responding to emergency when you completed and exercised your plan. Specific plans can be tailored for your personal situation. So take some time, take a few minutes to draft a plan if you haven't already. Keep some copies in your kits and update your plans at least annually. And you'll see on the screen that we've got 3 examples of templates to get started. You don't have to reinvent the wheel here. Prepared BC is a good resource. The regional resource Prepare Yourself is another. And as Jane was just discussing, the Household Evacuation Guide also has a template in there on planning. And there's a lot of information that can go into plans, and those include just a quick overview of some of those items are location of your emergency supplies, contact lists, what to do in evacuations, what to do when sheltering in place, your neighborhood plans, pet plans, livestock plans, and important paperwork, insurance documents, etc. Number 2 is to build your kits. Consider what kits you need and where. Shown here in the illustration is a grab and go kit. And some of examples of items that go into these various kits. Grab and go is just one, obviously. Shelter in place is the more commonly used kits where you don't evacuate, but you stay in place, and power outage or a snowstorm, those sorts of things can result in needing to stay in place. You want to be looking at least a 3-day supply of non-perishable food. If you're in a susceptible area, we say 1 week. If you're in a rural area, you may even need to plan for 2, as power outages beyond 1 week are not that uncommon. Having a first aid kit, seasonal clothing and footwear, battery-powered hand crank flashlight, personal waste items. We can remember the pandemic remind us all that we need to have a fulsome toilet paper supply, cell phone chargers, prescription medications, at least 4 liters of water per person per day, or filtration systems, cash and small bills, battery powered hand crank radio, whistle to signal, local maps, and N95 masks are some of the items that you can keep in there. We have a very good list on you can find at prepareyourself.ca. Number 4, know your neighbors. They say that no person's an island, and it's especially true during disasters. After the earthquake of 2011, Leanne Daisio, the former mayor of Christchurch, said, if the earthquakes taught us one thing, it's that there is strength in our communities coming together to take charge of their destiny. And that's been shown to be true through many disasters that have happened worldwide. And some of the ways that you can connect with your neighbors is through our volunteer pod. If you don't know what pod you're in or who those leaders are, you can email us at ssipod@crd.bca. We're also looking for volunteers, and we'll train you if you're interested in becoming a leader. Attend your pod events such as pod logs, exercises, fire smart assessments, etc. Understanding who's more vulnerable in your neighborhood and looking out for them and seeing how you can support them. And then knowing locations of your neighborhood assembly areas, evacuation routes, etc. So that is a quick recap on how to get prepared. It's as simple as 1, 2, 3, 4, knowing your hazards, making your plan, gathering your supplies, and knowing your neighbors. And at this point, we do have a few links there, which will be shared out later. But to emphasize Jane's point on the PAN system, we really want to encourage that. And the link will be in the chat for that. But please ask your questions, and feel free to reach out offline if you want. We're happy to take your calls. Thank you.
Thanks, John. I don't see any new questions at the moment. If any pop up, I'll either let you know, or we can read them at the end.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, John. John is your local emergency program coordinator. So if you want to have more information on anything we're discussing today, he's a good person to talk to. Let's do one final call for questions for any of our panel today. And so I believe we have one in the chat to start with. Is that true, Jolette?
Yes. Can you see it, or do you want me to read it out to you?
If you could, thank you.
Yes. Any updates on the new zone definitions? I'm asking because there are different approaches taken to forest health to retain moisture and lower fire risks that are different from fire smart approaches.
So Rob, it sounds like this one would be to you, and maybe I can even add to this. For folks who are concerned about retaining moisture and the vegetation management recommendations of Fire Smart, what would you say to them?
Well, I'm not sure about as far as the water retention. Is that meaning like having our own supply of water, as in like big cisterns, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. I don't know much about people building retention ponds. I know in our area people do, but that's typically farming use. So I don't know what else. I know when I go to Sydney Island, everybody there has to have a tank, and that's in a bylaw that they've written for themselves, where there's a tank with a pump, and that's available for firefighting. Not so much drinking water though. So yeah, I'm not sure. Sorry, really, what the question, where she's trying to go here, or where we're trying to go.
No problem.
Mitchell said that he might be able to jump in here as well.
Perfect.
Hi, I'm just trying to put my, oh, that's weird. No, my Zoom can no longer detect my camera, so I can't have my camera on. Anyway, yeah, hello, Darlene and the rest of the guests here. I'm familiar with where I think Darlene's going, because we've had some discussions about this before. So Darlene is concerned about removing lower branches. Now, let's go back to what Fire Smart's about. And we have to look at our overarching assumptions. One is Fire Smart is about protecting human assets, our homes, important infrastructure, schools, hospitals, things like that. If we want to protect those things, the science is very strongly established that our most effective way to do that is with fuel removal. Now, I know Darlene is looking, and Transition Salt Spring is concerned about looking at forest health in general, away from the zones that FireSmart's talking about. And that may be all very well and good, but the new science is suggesting that we don't necessarily need to eradicate fire from the landscape. Fire is a natural part of a forest ecology, and maybe Connor might be able to jump in with some more about this as well. So we can accept a certain degree of fire in our landscape, maybe not so much on Salt Spring, since we are in an intermix zone. But when we're looking at areas far away from homes, they're letting fire, or they're trying to let fire do its thing, and maybe even encouraging some prescribed fire. The science behind the ideas that Transition Salt Spring has been proposing, nobody's been able to share with me, and I've been asking for it for years now, with qualitative or quantitative science that can suggest that we can protect homes by increasing moisture content through enhancing forest health. There is no science that backs this up. I've been asking for it for years. Intuitively, healthy forests are slightly more fire resistant, but it's not a conclusive, definitive way to protect homes from wildfire. The most effective way is from fuel removal. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to create a clear cut or log your property out to 30 meters. It means removing fuel, especially in the 1.5 meter zone around your home, and then being judicious about what is in the areas farther out. And we're really only talking about 100 feet from buildings. Now, talking to some fire ecologists and forest ecologists, some suggest that, hey, if you really care about various special trees and special environments, you might want to actually continue to do thinning and pruning. And I'm sure that Eric Picala, the Transition Salt Spring panelist who will be presenting next week, will also be talking about pruning and thinning as ways to enhance forest health and encourage a more fire resilient ecology. And that is in keeping with what the First Nations people have been practicing on Salt Spring and other lands around our region for thousands of years. They essentially did Fire Smart with low intensity fires, which created a much more open landscape. Now, I can go on about this at length, but I'll stop there and we'll see if that helps to address Darlene's question.
I think so, and I've heard you go off on length, and it's usually quite good. There's one other piece I kind of want to pull out of that. It seems like, if I'm reading into this question, there's a question about coarse woody debris, which is the forester term for old branches and logs on the ground, and the role that plays in forest health and then also in wildfire risk. I am not a forester, but I know someone who is, and they're on this call. Is that something you could speak to, Connor?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question. It's one we get all the time. And I think when we're working at scales, like at the forest scale, we're working at a very different perspective than at the home scale. So like when I'm giving someone advice on how to protect their home, I'm not really concerning myself with the ecology of the site. I'm concerning myself with protecting that structure as much as possible. And this is kind of what Mitch was talking about. So I want to create a 10-meter fuel free. I don't want coarse woody debris in that area. I don't want good habitat in that area for animals. But that's a pretty small total area when we start looking at the forest scale. And when I work at the forest scale, I have a very different perspective because I want to reduce wildfire risk, but I want to maintain a really healthy, functioning forest. So it's a different approach that I adopt when I'm working at the forest scale. And when I say forest scale, I'm thinking double-digit hectares, maybe hundreds of hectares, and I'm creating a plan for reducing the wildfire risk, but maintaining all the other important functions that that forest provides. And since we're usually quite a ways away from the structure, we can be a little bit more flexible with our approach for reducing wildfire risk, and we can introduce nuance and we can compromise on some of those guidelines we might adopt from FireSmart. So coarse woody debris is a really good example because there are options for maintaining coarse woody debris, and they should be included in a plan for reducing wildfire risk at the forest scale. So I recently worked on a project near Salt Spring on Lower Vancouver Island, and when I was creating this, we call it a fuel management prescription for a forest. When I was in the forest, there's actually very little coarse woody debris that was good habitat. And I realized that if we were going to go in there and manage the fuel, we could actually recruit some coarse woody debris and we could actually improve the habitat. And as long as we did it in a thoughtful way, we're not going to appreciably be increasing the wildfire risk, but we are going to be creating much better habitat for little critters and certain species and things like that. But I think maybe the biggest message I can kind of give is that there's not really for FireSmart or for fuels management, there's not really a one size fits all. There's a set of guidelines and we have to fit those in to the context of the site and the scale that we're working at.
A good answer. So I'm hearing some nuance there that in the first zone, that perhaps that 10-meter zone around a house, dead fuel is probably your enemy, something you don't want to. But when you talk about the landscape layer, a little bit further out, the conversation becomes a bit more nuanced.
Yeah, for sure.
Very good.
There's another question that's kind of related, but it says Mitchell is typing an answer. It's from Susan. She says she lives on top of Mount Tuam, and there's an incredible amount of fallen trees, wildfire fuel, and more than they could ever clear. But it looks like, Mitchell, did you answer that question?
Yeah, but I'd be happy to chime in. And I answered Susan, but I could answer others.
Okay.
So as Rob had touched on earlier, we've got, I guess, 19 local FireSmart representatives with the department now. We provide residential assessments. We'll come and visit your home and walk around your property with you. And we can look at things you can do to make your home much safer for fire. One thing I want to touch on about that I recommend for people is that sometimes it can be a bit daunting to, if you look at your landscape and go, oh my God, but if you look at it as a multi-year project, it becomes very manageable and start with maybe the 1.5 meter zone, maybe even the up to 10 meter zone and do that first. That's where you're going to get your biggest bang for buck. And then you can approach it over a period of years. Remember, we have an area with moderate risk. Yes, climate change is increasing our risk, but I think that if it's really about changing your relationship with your immediate landscape and with forests in general. And that's what the whole FireSmart program is about. It's not a one and done. You're going to suddenly, make your yard safe and then you never need to touch it again. You need to be thinking about, what kinds of things are we going to plant? What kinds of things am I going to prune? What kinds of things do I want to have near my home? And then continue with that into the future. What kind of a forest am I going to take care of? And as you change your relationship with your yard and the forest around you, over a span of years, we're going to see much greater enhancements for protection of individual residences and reduce the risk of a catastrophic event that could threaten numerous homes. That's me.
No, I like what you said there. That Fire Smart is not a one and done thing. It's something that is iterative and things, something you can start today, but it'd be very difficult and probably impossible to finish it in a day. It's something that will probably take years and in some cases generations at the landscape level.
It looks like there's a question here for Connor. The question is, does the CWRP contemplate prescribed fire?
Yeah, so this is a great question. The very short answer is yes, it absolutely does. One of the issues we have throughout BC is that in the last 70 years, we've gotten really good at putting out fires. And that's led to some pretty serious fuel accumulations throughout BC. But that's not even a problem. The problem is even more magnified on the South Coast, where not only have we gotten good at putting out fire, is we've stopped a tradition of prescribed burning that the Indigenous people have been pursuing for thousands of years. So it's almost become a natural part of the ecosystem here because it's been such a long-standing practice that's really just stopped completely. And we've also been putting out those natural fires. So we do have huge amounts of fuel accumulation. And we talk at length in the CWRP about how that's a problem and how prescribed burning is something that a conversation is occurring at the province-wide level about how we really need to get back to this. And that's something that's ongoing, and there is a lot of momentum behind it. The downside is that prescribed burns are really challenging. You need to get a lot of public buy-in. You need to get the right people on the ground. You need to write a really solid plan. You need the weather to cooperate. You need the right site. And at the end of the day, we just need to start with baby steps of just educating people, like what we're doing in this webinar, about how prescribed fire is a tool that we need to start using again and again. We used to do a lot more burning in BC. It's basically doesn't happen really at all anymore. That being said, we have noticed some places in Salt Spring that are actually potentially options for prescribed fire. I don't know if the Capital Regional District is the right people to be leading projects like that. I think Jonathan might be able to speak to that, but there are places that it could happen. I think it'll be a long time before it starts happening, but I think the conversation at least is starting in the Community Wildfire Resiliency Plan, and we'll see where it goes.
Thanks, Connor.
Sorry, I'm finding my mute button. My background's in prescribed fire. I love prescribed fire. I would love to see the CRD be doing prescribed fire, but the barriers that Connor spoke to are real. I'm really happy that this question came up, actually. I'm almost wondering, did I plant this? But if you think cultural fire, ecological fire is something that you want to see in your backyard, it would really help if you tell people. Tell folks that this is something that you think is a priority, that it's going to make you safer, that it's something you want to see. A little bit of fire and a little bit of smoke can prevent a whole lot of fire and a lot of smoke. That's a difficult message a lot of the time. So if we're hearing it from the community, then it makes us as decision makers a lot more comfortable when we do step into that space. I can't see it in the next couple of, say, months or even years, but in the longer term, I would be shocked if prescribed fire was not part of the answer for your community on Salt Spring Island.
Okay, I see another question here, Jonathan. It says, no question that fire smarting your home is important. How could other tools, like a wildfire hazard development permit area, reduce fire risks?
I'm going to phone a friend. Connor, can you speak to wildfire hazard development permit areas, what they are and how they might be applied on Salt Spring Island?
Yeah, so I'll start just by a brief explanation of what a wildfire hazard development permit area is. There becoming more and more common in BC. I wouldn't say they're quite common yet, but they are becoming more common. North Vancouver has one, Whistler has one, I think Nelson has one, like communities all over BC have these. And they vary quite a bit in how they're implemented, but basically the structure of it is kind of consistent. And so what the community does is identify areas of particularly high wildfire risk throughout a community. So maybe areas that are right in the interface. If the interface is really discrete and obvious, these will all be highlighted. And they'll be subject to the guidelines of a wildfire hazard development permit area. And what that usually involves is that when you go to build a home or subdivide land or do anything that involves permitting, there's an extra requirement where you need to sometimes it varies, but generally an assessment needs to happen and some guidelines need to be applied to your development. So for example, say I'm building a house in a wildfire hazard development permit area, my architectural plan might have to include fire smart approved building materials and fire smart approved landscaping. And sometimes they use restrictive covenants on the property. Sometimes they require professional assessments, but it's just a way to create a really resilient kind of barrier around a community in those wildfire risk areas. And the idea is that if we have a really resilient, really fire smart layer between our community and the forest, it makes it really unlikely for a fire to penetrate that layer and become, a conflagration that's burning a lot of houses inside the community. And so in Salt Spring Island, that's definitely something that we talk about in our wildfire resiliency plan, but it's a little bit more complicated when you're working in an unincorporated electoral area, because there's just, in general, quite a few less interactions with local government where you could implement something like this. And then it becomes even more complicated in the Southern Gulf Islands, where local government the responsibilities are divided between the Capital Regional District, who our Community Wildfire Resiliency Plan is directed at, and the Islands Trust, who is, speaking generally, in charge of planning and land use in the Gulf Islands. It's a particularly unique situation in BC, in the Gulf Islands, where the responsibilities of local government are divided like that. So the short answer is that we definitely talk about a wildfire hazard development permit area in the Community Wildfire Resiliency Plan. The development of such a permit area would require cooperation between these two layers of local government, but it is a really nice solution or option for making sure some of the most vulnerable parts of a community are adopting fire smart guidance when they're building new homes. And another thing to add is that part of the development permit area is that it takes a long view towards building resilience, because it only really has teeth or really comes into place when there's a permitting requirement, when development is happening. And the assumption is that over a long enough timeline, all the vulnerable properties are going to interact with local government in this way. And so over decades, you'll eventually be building this super resilient interface using this.
Oh, great answer. I'm the talking head for Capital Regional District on this call. And that's a conversation we very much would love to have with the Islands Trust and the Improvement District on how they see this moving forward and how we can support them. So again, a lot of layers of government, and we have a bit of a role here to explore all of our options. Any further questions?
One last question just was, where can this recording be viewed after the webinar is over?
What a good segue. The recording of this webinar will be shared with all of you. It's going to take me about a week to get the recording downloaded and then uploaded, and then to make it available to you folks here. But within a week, you should see an email in your inbox. It's got a link to this webinar, so review it at any time. And then, of course, feel free to contact any of us after the event today and ask your questions if something came up. With that, I think I will close out the webinar, but not before I try and give you a takeaway or three in this case. I think what I heard today was that FireSmart, you have a way more control over the vulnerability of your own property than you might think. It's not just a fire rolling over your home. You actually can do a lot of things that will increase your personal resilience. Number two, I heard about planning and having a plan. And I believe that in the evacuation guide, there's a little space where you can make a little plan. And third, and not last, but have the equipment that you would need to implement that plan, whether that's food or other materials for yourself. So that's my takeaway from today's event. And I'm going to ask you one final poll here. So just stay with me for that. Do you feel more prepared for wildfire in your community because of the event today? Be honest with this. We won't take it too personally. We want to make these things useful for you. And then last, will you take an action? Did you hear about something that you can take away with you that you can actually act on because of this webinar today? I'll let that hang for just one more minute. Please do vote. And then I'll show the results here. So we have pretty much everybody say yes, that they felt more prepared because of the webinar today. That's excellent news. Thank you very much. Most people, yes, a few folks somewhat. And then everybody said they heard something that they can take action on. So really great result. That's exactly why we were holding this webinar today. So I want to say a big thank you to all of you for attending, for dialing in. I know this is your time, and we wanted to make it worth your time, and to our speakers. So if our speakers today, if you wouldn't mind just turning on your cameras. Thank you for the panel and joining us. Really appreciate your work today. And all of you, I know, are available for contact after this for folks who have questions in the community. A link will be in your inbox shortly. We did speak to that already, but wait, there's more. Don't leave just yet. We are using this event to launch a whole bunch of interesting products that we think you're going to be interested in. One of them is, a 100-page plus government report. That is just what you wanted. But if you really do want to dig into climate change or the effects of fire on the ecosystem in Salt Spring, you can find all of that with references in the Community Wildfire Resiliency Plan that is online today. If you don't want to read 100 pages, we have boiled it down to 3 pages for you, and you can just read that little 3-page summary. That's probably what I recommend, honestly. We also have a Salt Spring Island household evacuation guide for you. Go look that up. That's going to tell you where your reception centers are, where your assembly areas are, and please do sign up for the public alert notification system. It's really easy. It's just downloading an app. Find all of that information online at our website. The URL is down at the bottom there, or much simpler, just type Salt Spring Island emergency into your search bar and you will find it. Thank you very much for attending today. Goodbye.